Your brain really is a remarkable piece of kit, but it can't do everything all at the same time. So there are lots of the things that you do that aren't controlled by your brain. You don't think about them first before you do them. And these are reflexes. Reflexes are described as fast, automatic, protective responses. So things like a blink or a sneeze or a cough. And all of these have one thing in common. They're all controlled by the same structure, and that structure is called the reflex arc. All of these pathways have the same basic bits. Here's what it looks like. First of all, we need a stimulus. In case you're wondering, that's a toe. The toe isn't the stimulus, this is the stimulus. This is a drawing pin. So, if you have ever been unlucky enough to find a drawing pin the hard way, you'll know exactly what happens next. You wind up with your foot waving in the air. But why? It isn't because you think about it, not at all, because this is a reflex. A reflex starts with a stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is sticking a drawing pin into your big toe. It could be touch, it could be heat, it could be all sorts of things. In this case, it's a drawing pin sticking into your big toe. So, that is picked up by receptors, which are little structures in your skin, which will pick up the pressure caused by the drawing pin. And those receptors are connected to a sensory neuron. A neuron's a single cell in your nervous system. This is a sensory neuron. And this sensory neuron carries information from receptors all the way across to your spinal cord. You can spot a sensory neuron because this is the cell body and it's off to one side of the pathway that the impulse takes. When it reaches your spinal cord, it's connected to an intermediate or a relay neuron. And these connections between neurons are called synapses. This is a synapse. And a synapse isn't a physical connection. That gap's there for a reason. That gap physically exists. Now this relay neuron, or intermediate neuron, its job is twofold. It passes on the information to the next part of the reflex arc. It also sends that information up to the brain. That's not because your brain thinks about it. On the contrary, remember, these are fast automatic protective responses, so there's no thinking going on here. If you've ever done something like this, if you stop and think about it, you'll realise that by the time you really realise it's actually painful, you've already got your foot waving about in midair. So, no thinking required. Here's why. Because the third kind of cell that we come across is a motor neuron. Now this motor neuron, and again you can spot it because it's got its cell body in line with the rest of the neuron. This motor neuron is attached to an effector. And in this case, the effector is a muscle or a group of muscles, the ones that lift your foot off the floor and wave it about in mid-air. So, all of this happens without you having to think about it, and it happens automatically. And quite quick. And it's about keeping you safe. Which brings us right back to fast, automatic, protective responses. If you're working at around about an E grade, you have to be able to describe a reflex arc using those sorts of terms. If you're working at round about a C grade, you have to be able to talk about all of those bits in the structure and what they do. If you're working towards an A grade, then you have to be able to talk about some more detail in the structure. Specifically, you have to be able to talk about the role of something called myelin. This is an enlarged view of that little bit of the structure, which is called an axon. And the axon has wrapped around it this fatty tissue. And this fatty tissue is hugely important. It's called myelin, and it's an insulator, and it's important in making sure that nerve signals are transmitted properly. If you do AS biology, you'll find out why, but for an A grade student, you have to be able to talk about the fact that this myelin is here, wrapped around the axon of sensory neurons, for example, and it helps to make sure that the impulse travels efficiently.